Of the day number 1.
Prohibition of gang insignia in government premises bill, second reading.
Mr Speaker,
Todd McLean.
I move that the prohibition of gang insignia in government premises bill be now read a second time. Mr Speaker, the bill restricts the display of gang insignia in central and local government premises. It makes the display of gang insignia in government premises an offence and empowers the police to arrest the person who wears it and to seize the offending article. I'd like to thank the Chair and members of the Law and Order Committee for their work on the bill and for the amendments they have recommended to include every school and the grounds of premises in New Zealand and police buildings in the scope of this legislation. Mr Speaker, gangs are a scourge on society. Every political party in this Parliament recognises this. They commit crime, peddle poisonous drugs to our children and create victims in vulnerable communities. The gang patch is not a patriotic flag or a symbol of honour and respect. It's a symbol of intimidation by gang members who wear it. It announces to the world that they engage in criminal behaviour and that they are proud to intimidate law-abiding citizens. The Select Committee heard from submitters throughout the country, and I want to touch briefly on some of the submissions that the committee heard, and I do hope members opposite will listen. The Mirapara Area School made the forceful point that children at school don't need to be exposed to gang insignia. They need to be protected from it. Apotiki Council said that the bill sets the right boundaries to reduce gang intimidation of our communities. Whakatane District Council told the committee that the bill will help reduce levels of intimidation of the public. The Whitireia Community Law Centre and Chris Whafoi's electorate in Mana spoke courageously about the chilling effects of gang violence and intimidation in Pororua. They have been at the coalface of protecting victims of crime from gang harassment. They said that members of the public have a right to visit government premises without fear. And Mr Speaker, I call on Mr Whafoi, who received that submission in committee, to listen to his own community, which is telling him to support this bill. You see, the Labour Party has said that they don't think the bill is necessary. Phil Goff talked boldly in the dying days of the last government about banning gangs. But when it comes to supporting measures to do something important, Labour's voice falls short. Phil Goff and Chris Whafoi sat on the Select Committee. They heard the submissions from the Kaura District Council, which said, and I quote, a legislated ban will not only protect frontline staff and customers from intimidation, but will also prevent intimidation of staff who might otherwise have initiated and or had to enforce such bans on a case-by-case basis. Mr Speaker, it's wrong to put the onus of Wins case officers or a school teacher to issue a trespass notice to individual members of the mongrel mob after they walk into a public building. We need to recognise the gang patch for what it is. It is an intention to intimidate. A blanket ban that criminalises this intimidating behaviour protects our hard-working public officials and as well as citizens who use our public services. Mr Speaker, I call on the Labour Party to put aside this rhetoric and listen to the evidence that was presented to the Select Committee. I call on them to get back in touch with the people on the front line. They deal with the consequences of gang violence, gang intimidation in vulnerable communities and gang recruitment of young people. These communities are asking us to introduce these measures. Mr Speaker, across the world, from Britain to the United States to Australia, legislators are acknowledging the problems that gangs create and empowering their law enforcement agencies to take action against them. Just last month, Prime Minister Julia Gillard announced plans across the Tasman to crack down on gangs. Some of these measures, including the confiscation of proceeds of criminal gang activity, are already available in New Zealand. Australia realises that the threats that gangs pose to society, and unlike other parties in this Parliament here in New Zealand, are prepared to take action. Over the past 4.5 years, putting the interests of victims of crime and law-abiding citizens first has been the guiding principle of this government's law and order policy. We've increased sentences for our worst offenders. We've improved victims' rights. We've put 600 more police onto the front line. We've made it harder for offenders to get bail. We're giving police the technology to spend more time on the beat and less time at their desks. Police patrols, Mr Speaker, are up by 70%. We have improved technology to intercept gang communications and the powers to dismantle gang fortifications. These policies are successful because we're now seeing the lowest levels of crimes for some 24 years. Violent crime has dropped by 70% of the last 4 years after steadily increasing under the previous government. Mr. Speaker, there's not much about the mongrel mob that my electorate of Rotorua is proud of. But we were proud that the first ever seizure of assets under the Criminal Proceeds Recovery Act involved the mongrel mob in Makatu. Valentine Barclay Nicholas, the local chapter boss who had violent criminal convictions going back some 30 years, had all of his beachfront properties seized. 9 cars, his treasured Harley-Davidson, were confiscated from him. Just a few weeks ago, we announced that the seizure of $150 million from criminals since the government passed this very important legislation. For the first time ever, gangs are starting to hurt, and it's because we're arming our enforcement agencies with the right tools. At the same time, we must be aware that gangs will change and adapt. There are indications that gangs are becoming more sophisticated in their transportation and manufacture of drugs, how they transfer assets, how they intimidate people, and how they communicate with each other. But criminals are not always very smart. The police are now effectively using their powers to intercept communications between gang members. Their phone calls, text messages, their emails can now be intercepted. And for those criminal masterminds who freely parade their gang patches on the internet, it's not just their Facebook friends who now know what they're up to. As a parliament, we can't stop technology, but we must be vigilant about how gangs are using technology, and we must support the fine work the police do by giving them the tools to respond to this. We must constantly update these tools. Mr. Speaker, this bill will make it harder for gangs to intimidate New Zealanders. It's not a silver bullet to ban gangs in New Zealand, but it's another important tool to make law-abiding New Zealanders feel safe in their communities. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the House supporting this bill through to the committee stages. Thank you.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Chris Farfoy.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for Rotorua for laying down